Okay, who am I? Well, if you haven't picked up the visual clues already, my name's John McCartney. I've been retired for a number of years, which has allowed me to indulge in this resurrection of Dr. Wimp's surgery. So what's the talk about? Well, first of all, Dr. Wimp is the program, and Dr. Wimp's surgery is a book written to support that program. Where do I fit in? Well, we'll talk about that. Find out what I actually did, and then find out what's to be done next. Okay, so what is Dr. Wimp? It's an application written to aid the writing of Wimp programs to make them as simple as possible for those people who wish to get into that sort of programming. It was first written by Andrew Eyre in 1995. Well, that was when it was launched. And he continued supporting the program until 1999, at which point he handed over the reins to Ray Favor. And Ray carried on supporting the program until his untimely death in 2010. So, what's Dr. Wimp's surgery? As I say, a book to support the Dr. Wimp program, and Ray wrote it the year before he took over the support of the program, Dr. Wimp itself. So where do I come in? Well, it all started with Jim Nagel when he was editor of Archive magazine, and it was when I met Jim at the 2019 London show. I went to his stall to pick up my copy of Archive, and that's when he mugged me. He asked me, "Can you help me with a project?" So, not wishing to appear unwilling, I indicated I might, and he said he needed to recreate Dr. Wimp's surgery. Now, the reason behind that is that when Ray Favor died, he left the rights to his books and his software to Archive magazine, or the editor of Archive magazine. But unfortunately, the impression files and the printing masters all went AWOL. Anyway, I was too slow to refuse. I was hooked, and Jim reeled me in. So what did I actually do? Well, for a start, I used Windows for scanning and the optical character recognition of the book. I'd actually got a copy of the book, which I'd bought off Ray many years before I discovered that I wasn't really a programmer myself. Once I'd carried out that process on Windows, I used RiskOS in order to edit the files, sort the layout, and publish the end result. So what did I do? I spent a couple of weeks scanning the book, which fortunately was spiral bound. So I was able to open the book flat out on a flatbed scanner and get the scanning done that way. But initially, all I did was produce two versions of a sample chapter, and I sent them off for Jim's approval. Now, he was very pleased with the results. I got an email back which said, he was very pleased, which was gratifying to me. But unfortunately, the go-ahead to do the rest of the book never arrived. And of course, we probably all know why, because Jim's death was announced in the spring of 2020, 2020. And effectively, I abandoned the project. And it wasn't until the following year that I resumed it, essentially as a vanity project. I didn't know where it would end up, but I thought I'm sure I could sort it out. And to quote the original chairman of the TV program Mastermind, Magnus Magnusson, I've started, so I'll finish. So how did I do it? Well, as I said, I scanned on Windows. Samples I scanned on the Epson flatbed, which was, it was okay, but it was very awkward. The fact that it was a spiral-bound book meant that I could scan 2 A5 pages at a time, but this wouldn't do for the full book. So I decided to sacrifice the spiral binding, cut it all out, and I fed the sheets into the automatic document feeder on my Brother laser scanner. The scans I then fed to Abby Fine Reader and carried out the optical character recognition on that. One thing I discovered when I did the samples was that, unlike the RiskOS application Sleuth, which needed a black and white 300 dpi image to work with, Abby Fine Reader required a grayscale image, and it wasn't until I twigged to that I managed to get reasonably good optical character recognition. Just a quick glance at what it looks like to work with Abby Fine Reader. There are a number of stages before I get to this, but this image shows that it's actually loading a sequence of pages. This is chapter 4, the one that I did as a sample, and it's at this point it's loading 15 pages and it's only got up to page 13. Once it's loaded everything, it displays in this left-hand window, it displays what it thinks is text. And you can tell it to ignore certain areas. And in fact, what I tended to do was to get it to ignore the headers and the footers. I deleted those. And once you've done that, you can then get on to look at the next page. And the second page has unfortunately got a diagram on it, and unless you tell it otherwise, Fine Reader will try and read the text in that. And of course, there's a problem here in that the bottom of that text window overlaps with the diagram. It's recognized that bit as a picture, but what I wanted to do was to get rid of the whole lot. So I shifted the bottom line of the text window upwards and highlighted that area. You just draw a lasso around it, press delete, and you end up with things that you don't want to be recognized, left out of the program. So that's what we would start to recognize. Now, the recognition is initiated by that read button there, and it just shows that it's in the process of reading the fourth of 15 pages. And it really doesn't take very long. It probably takes about less than half a minute to do that. Once it's done the reading, in the right-hand window, you get to see what it thinks is the correct interpretation of the scans. And if you look closely, you'll see that there are a number of problems. Exclamation marks or plings tend to come out as not always plings, but in some cases eyes, in some cases digit ones, and things that we would normally recognize as pling run image comes out as pling space run one mage. And this is a real problem, and we can see there are other errors there. And I decided that rather than teach FineReader to sort this out, it would be easier to rectify when I edited it in RiskOS. So what did I do next? Well, the editing on RiskOS meant I've got to get that text into RiskOS. So the output from FineReader was saved directly into Virtual Risk PC as a Word file. And then I was able to transfer it to my ARMX6 using ShareFS. And finally, I would load the Word files into TextWriter, which enabled me to save the whole lot out as pure text. And the reason I didn't save it out as text on the Windows side was that I wasn't sure that the standard of the text that Windows understood would be precisely the same as the standard of text that RiskOS would understand. So I decided to leave that problem to the interaction between Word files and TextWriter. Once I'd got it into TextWriter and saved out as pure text, then really this is where the work really began. I mean, there was a lot of stuff on the Windows side, things like sorting out getting the file numbers of the individual scans to correspond with the page numbers in the book. Of course, after I'd done that, I realized there was a simpler way than the way I'd chosen, but isn't that always the way? What I did initially, I used Paul Spranger's convert text to catch the mistakes on a file-by-file basis. But I kept on finding there was always another mistake to catch. So I decided that what I would then do is carry out more editing within RiskOS. And I have to say that the path I chose wasn't the wisest, so I don't recommend it. And I can only say that it seemed like a good idea at the time. That's the only saving grace. I loaded single chapters into impression. And then I used search and replace an impression to find the bits that needed changing. And the reason for that was, of course, that in impression, using Trinity as the default text, it would be more readable than if I tried to do it in a text editor. It was fairly tedious. It took me quite a long time. Once I'd satisfied myself that I'd done all the editing, it came to doing the layout. Now, the problem with the layout was that because we didn't have Ray's original files, we didn't know what metrics he was using. In other words, we didn't know the size of the frames, we didn't know what the font size was, we didn't know what the line spacing was. Nor did we know the font name, because in the second edition of the book, which is the one I was working with, the font itself, the face, was quite unrecognizable to me. I did search, but I couldn't find it. So how did I get around the problems? Well, simply using a ruler on the printed page and making an estimate as best I could, and also deciding to use Trinity as the base font. there was really no need to change the font. Trinity is as good as any other. So once I'd started to work in impression, I found there was a problem in that as styles were added, the style list became a mess. I'd had to add styles in order to match what Ray had done in his original document. All new styles were added at the bottom of the list. Anybody who knows impression will know what I'm talking about. Any unused styles could easily be deleted, but that didn't stop there being no logical hierarchy to the styles that remained. And I must have had something like 20 or 30 different styles that we used throughout the document. So I needed to reorder the list, but I didn't know how to do it. So I put a plea out on the impression mailing list. And that was answered, I'm eternally grateful to her, by Harriet Baisley. And she told me exactly what I needed to do. Not only did I have to reorder the style list, but with so many new styles and keyboard shortcuts for them, I needed a completely new function key string, which I've also created. So the end result is what? I've got a near facsimile of the second edition. Illustrations in it, some of them come from the only known file, which is of the first edition, and any illustrations that couldn't be found in the first edition, I took from the scans that I'd made on the Windows side, or I recreated them in artworks. Now, Ray's presentational style is perhaps not one that I would have used myself if I'd been writing the book in his stead. It would be invidious of me to criticize Ray's style, because at the time he wrote it, he would be trying to make the book as understandable as possible to people who were interfacing with the program. But I come to it purely from the point of view of presentation. So I felt that there needed to be some changes to improve the clarity of the layout and make it easier for people to read the book. Now, there are three major changes as I see. One is that Ray tended to use hyphens as punctuation. They have their place in punctuation, but Ray seemed to be over fond of it, and he would use a hyphen in place of a comma, and then he would use a comma to close the phrase that he'd started with the hyphen. I found this difficult to cope with. Also, he used a lot of unnecessary emphasis with single quotes around words that I felt really didn't need them. In fact, one of my favorite technical authors, Marcus Scroggie, who used to write in Wireless World as Cathode Ray, he had the same habit, and I've got several of his books, and I find this unnecessary emphasis quite irritating. But the most major, if I can misuse English to describe it, is the fact that corpus was a bad choice for showing the programs in the book. in the program fragment. And anybody who has used Corpus for writing a program will know that the biggest drawback to it is the fact that if you've got a 1 and an L, what is that, an L and a 1? It's difficult to tell. So what I did was choose a totally different font, Deja Vu Sans Mono, which is freely available from the Pling store. And of course, the difference between 1s and Ls is quite obvious there. But I decided actually to use the simpler version of that font, that's Verity Mono, because Deja Vu Sans Mono doesn't work on the Virtual RISC PC. In other words, anything below RiskOS 5, whereas Verity Mono is a simplified version which will work on Virtual RISC PC. So the current situation is that I'm quite happy with as far as we've got. It took me until late August, I think it was late August 2021. So having started in the spring and spent roughly 6 months on it, I was quite pleased with the progress I've made. One thing I didn't do was to put an index in, because the idea, in discussion between the current editor of Archive, Gavin Smith, who now holds the copyright by virtue of his position as editor, we decided that it would be only published as a freely available PDF file. A problem I have is that when I bought the book, I didn't actually get, or if I did, I've lost the software that came with the book. So it's very difficult for me to verify that the scans I produced correctly differentiated in Courier between 1s and Ls. Everything else is okay. It's just that going through the programs and program fragments is incredibly tedious. So if I had the software, and if anybody has got it, you can let me have it if you so wish, and then I can put the programs and program fragments into Impression with Impression's smart quotes turned off, because I'm sure that when everything first went into Impression, I had smart quotes on, and of course, when you're programming, smart quotes don't really mean a lot. So I desperately need the software. Now, Gavin has given me a free hand to develop the book as I see fit. However, I don't want to abuse that freedom. I don't want to trample all over what Ray produced.
Right.
It's a wonderful effort that he's produced, and I admire him for that. But I don't want to abuse the freedom that Gavin's given me. I'd simply want to improve the clarification of the exposition. Bit of a mouthful, but nevertheless, that's what I think about it. So where do we go in the future? Well, I need suggestions and corrections. The thing is that I'm the only person who's proofread it, and I am almost certain that I've made mistakes. And one of the reasons that I'm certain I've made mistakes is that I'm not foolproof. And proof of that is that my wife keeps telling me so on a regular basis. So I do need help with proofreading and suggestions and corrections. So if we're going to progress the book, I need some support. If anybody needs to get in touch with me about it, I have created an email account at Gmail. It's just drwimp@gmail.com, so not difficult to forget. Sorry, not difficult to remember. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, that's where they can do it. Now, Gavin wants it to be a work in progress. In other words, we'll put up the initial results. There'll be a special place on the archive website for that. And any new versions, any improved versions, well, we hope they're the improved version, will be added to the website so that each particular new edition is remains available for anybody who wants them. So that's the way you would access it on the archive website. Unfortunately, I have heard rumblings that there might be a new printed edition, which means that I'll have to create a proper index, which is not something I'm looking forward to particularly, but I'm sure we'll get there. I think that's pretty much it. If anybody's got any questions, then I'd be pleased to answer them.
Yeah. Do you know what happened to Ray Favor's old website?
Ah, right. Okay. I can tell you what that is. Let me just bring up Bookmaker. What list? Sorry, I'm looking at my RMX screen here. RiskOS.
Anytime.
Ray Favor's homepage. It's drwimp.riskos.org/home PHP. His original website, the one that's in the book, doesn't work anymore. But what I'll do is I'll make an announcement on the forum, and you know, I'll put all the links up there for anybody who wants to get in touch or wants to download the PDF.
Thanks for that.
Yes, I couldn't find Ray's website for a while, but what has transpired since he wrote the book, it was he wrote it with Dr Wimp version 3.8 in mind, and since then there have been some under the hood changes or improvements, I think by Chris Johnson, and it's now up to 5.02. Oh, there we are, my half hour's up. So if anybody wants to go watch the next talk, feel free, I shan't be offended. I will put an announcement about this onto the forum and probably on the CSA announce. I'll just need to get the address on the archive website for where the PDF can be downloaded, and I'll put that all together and try and get it available as soon as possible. Any other questions anybody's got? Oh, we've lost one person already. It's what I've done today is more historical than anything else. The one thing that I have to say, and anybody who's read my article in issue 5 of the current volume of Archive will know, is that I'm not a programmer. I've never attempted to write a WIMP program. I don't intend to. Life's far too short. but I'm quite happy to help other people write it through this book. Oh, we've just had a message from Doug Webb to say that Stefan has got technical issues and his talk is going to be delayed. So if anyone wants to stay here for an embarrassing silence, feel free. Yes, I have to say that when I started to pick up the reins again in spring of last year, it was, as I said in presentation, it was a vanity project. I didn't actually know who had the copyrights. In fact, Jim Nagel had never told me. I just thought I was doing him a favor. And it wasn't until late in the summer of last year, I made some inquiries, and I think there was mention on Ray's current website where you can actually download the Dr Wimp suite. It mentioned the fact that not only Chris Johnson had done some work, but that Steve Bryant had done some work on some of Ray's other software, and also Martin Avison had helped. So I got in touch with Martin, and it was through him I found out that the copyrights for software and books had been passed to the editor of Archive, which I probably had known sometime in the past, because I remember reading the obituary that was in Archive. In fact, I'll just look up the issue and the, where have I got it? Yes, it's Archive, volume 22, issue 9. So if anybody wants to look that up, it's a very comprehensive obituary, and Ray just wasn't the guy who wrote this book and supported the software. He was an able engineer who worked for the Civil Aviation Authority. So I must have read that some years ago, and I'd totally forgotten it. So it was a pleasure to dig the volume out of the archive and read it. Are there any other questions? Obviously not. Is there anything else I can say? I think that's about it, really. I have actually written an article about this and submitted it to Gavin Smith. Last week or the week before, I had to send him an amended version when I realised that I misinterpreted some of the things that Ray had put in the book. So hopefully that will appear in due course in Archive magazine, which I presume most people subscribe to.